Namaste, and welcome to this third part of readings from my own work. This time I'll be reading you an article called What is Kabbalah? Again from my collection of short stories called Bat Tesha the Blind that I published a few years ago. And it goes as follows. In the 21st century, where we are at least free to practice and pursue any and all religious and spiritual paths, Kabbalah is no less shrouded in mystery and misunderstanding than it was 1,000 years ago. In fact, without the brilliant genius of scholars like Gershom Scholem, we would be no less in the historical dark regarding Jewish mysticism in general, and Kabbalah specifically, than we were in the Dark Ages themselves. The Collins English Dictionary defines Kabbalah under the spelling Kabbalah with a C, between cabbage worm and cab driver, as an ancient Jewish mystical tradition based on an esoteric interpretation of the Old Testament. Well, that clears things up. These days, to most people, Kabbalah seems to mean the study of the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, and the practice of the mystical unification of masculine and feminine principles in one's everyday life. Now, the Zohar itself is indeed a Kabbalistic book of the oldest order, its importance not to be underestimated. Ascribed to a rabbi of the 2nd century, albeit actually written by Moshe de Leon, who died in 1305, it was widely accepted and used in mainstream Jewish culture to the point of sometimes even being the only book that doomed Jews carried with them to their journey to the death camps, on their journey to the death camps, meaning that they chose the Zohar over the Torah, which is saying a lot. In actual fact, though, the Zohar is just the tip of the Kabbalistic iceberg. Spanning close to 2 millennia and practiced in almost every country of Europe, Kabbalah includes literary jewels with spellbinding titles such as the Book of Clarity, anything but, The Life of the World to Come, the Book of Wonder, and one of my own favorites, The Revealer of Depths. And for those of us intrigued by the question of whether we are capable of manufacturing human beings, the Book of Creation, said to be written by the biblical patriarch Abraham himself, details how to create and breathe life into a human body. Now, in fact, the word golem, the name used by Tolkien for the hobbits gone bad, is Hebrew for soulless matter. Now, this word was used by Eliezer of Worms to describe the soulless creature he called into being by means of that Book of Creation in the 13th century. Now, as well as the ancient, obscure, esoteric books handed down to us through the ages, Kabbalistic history also abounds with fascinating and brilliant-minded personalities. One of the earlier accounts is of Abraham Abulafia, a Spanish Jew from the 1200s. He headed the Jewish mystical stream of prophetic or practical Kabbalah. Drunk on numbers and the conviction that he had to untie all the knots that bind one to this world, he used techniques incorporating yogic breathing exercises and linguistic methods aimed at transcending the meaning of all words. Almost all of Abulafia's writings are still in existence to this day, many of them still awaiting translation from medieval Hebrew. Now, Abulafia is regarded as someone who applied the teachings and revelations that he received on a practical as opposed to intellectual basis. He used them as a path leading inwards towards God. He called this path the path of names, or, as he phrased it himself, towards the world to come. Now, someone who directly influenced and in fact fundamentally reshaped and transformed Jewish mystical thought in his own lifetime was the fantastically gifted visionary Isaac Luria with his dazzling intellect. To have such an impact in the 1500s was indeed an incredible feat, considering it was before the advent of mass media, and the Jews were spread far and wide over the European and Asian continents. Now, together with other like-minded geniuses, who in the 16th century came together in a village called Tzfat, situated in what is now northern Israel, they became known as the Kabbalists of Tzfat. But through their words and actions, Kabbalah was transformed from a small group of esoterics to a popular doctrine. While some of the members of this group were prolific writers, of Luria himself there is no direct literature in existence. Everything we have from him was transcribed from his discourses by his disciples. When asked why he didn't commit anything to the written word himself, he apparently answered, "It is impossible to do so because all things are interrelated. I can hardly open my mouth to speak without feeling as though the sea bursts its dams and overflowed. How then can I express what my soul has received, and how can I put it down in a book?" Wow. Needless to say, his concepts of Jewish mysticism were among the most amazing and far-reaching ever put forward in the whole history of Kabbalah, and gave birth to the field of Lurian Kabbalah, which is still in practice among certain Orthodox Jews to this very day. Now, while those of us unversed in Jewish history have probably never heard of him, Sabtai Tzvi was also a major player in his day. He became known as the Kabbalistic Messiah and had as his mouthpiece a devoted disciple, in fact his prophet, Nathan of Gaza. Jews everywhere came to accept him as the Messiah, just as earlier Jesus was accepted by those who then became Christians. His revelations and ideology led to a revolution of Jewish consciousness, and there was a tremendous religious mass movement which spread like wildfire. Living as he did under the rule of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, his fame and elevated status, to cut a long story short, eventually got him exiled. He died in relative obscurity, his influence, however, to this very day continuing. So what were these Kabbalists doing, and what defined them as such? Well, that's the burning question. There are 7 main streams of Jewish mysticism, and they all involve varying degrees of magic, theology, mysticism, and mythology. What unites all Kabbalists everywhere and from all eras is the desire and intention to personally experience direct contact with ultimate reality, or with God, however you want to call this. Now, some schools practiced what is called Merkabah mysticism, the oldest form of Kabbalah. They attempted to evoke the appearance of God at will, using rituals and incantations, and citing specific secret passwords at the guarded gateways to each of the ascending, literally actually descending, worlds leading to God. Other Kabbalists used the numbers associated with the Hebrew letters to reinterpret the Torah and other source texts, revealing hidden secrets and discovering new pathways to God. Still others delved into entirely new understandings of the process of creation, finding ways to what they called free the sparks of the soul, cleave to God non-stop, or arrive at mystical union. Now, the depths to which these mystics went is mind-boggling and detailed in an often deliberately cryptic manner in written texts dating back to antiquity. Now, the first thing for a person new on the shores of Kabbalah to realize is that a big part of its practical branch, especially of that of early Kabbalah, is pure linguistic mysticism. As such, in order to follow the arguments of the Kabbalists or interact with the Kabbalists' living dynamic source texts, one has to be able to read Hebrew. Of course, attaining the level of proficiency required to do so involves many years of study and contemplation. However, also the smallest snippet of text, when meditated upon in its original language, can have the most amazing impact. There are entire books written on just the first word of the Torah, usually translated as in the beginning. What's more, a renowned Kabbalist once famously said that he could never get past the first letter of the Torah because of all the implications that this letter has, because of all the pathways that this letter gives way to. This to indicate that the study of Kabbalah is not about quantity, but it's about quality. Now, a different entry into the dynamic world of Kabbalah, bypassing the foundational Hebrew, is by means of what is called the path of numbers. Now, in my own case, it was this path that after many years led me to the study of Hebrew and the original Kabbalistic texts. This latter part, however, that is the step from the path of numbers to the Kabbalistic conception of numerical reality, is not a must. Of course, without actually going into the Kabbalistic texts, one's practice cannot strictly be called that of Kabbalah. Still, the essential understanding and even the mystical experience are the same in both cases, which is exactly what happened for me. Thus, it can be said that the path of numbers is a term used to indicate an entire mystical layer or understanding of reality, whereas practical Kabbalah is a specific branch thereof. Now, in this way, we have come to the second main thing to understand about Kabbalah. It is about deconstructing that which limits our life experience, not about constructing a new psychological, spiritual framework with which to subsequently approach life. One of the main meanings of the Hebrew word Kabbalah is reception, and as such, any practice that entails a thorough deconstruction of all that obstructs a direct interaction with life, in a sense constitutes Kabbalah, simply because it enlarges the capability to receive. Now, it is for this reason that both Kabbalah and the path of numbers, like all mystical traditions, adhere to the idea of negation. This means that even though every practice is initially characterized and limited by its own cultural religious conditioning, The deeper mystical insights that follow in this confined setting will inevitably lead to the negation of the confinement that setting is. As such, there are many Kabbalistic books in which we are shown how the source texts themselves advocate the transcending of the source text. In this way, the study of Kabbalah can lead one to the path of numbers, where the Kabbalistic terminology no longer applies, because any distinction implies limitation. Distinction, after all, implies this and not that, which is an expression of limitation. Furthermore, the friction implied in the not that part is the root of all psychological violence. So in the end then, also the denomination of numbers, which is a part of the path of numbers, will drop away, and all we are left with is the path or the way, as it is called in Taoism. In conclusion, it can be said that the truest expression of Kabbalah is non-violent reception of life. Now, Abulafia, who I mentioned earlier, referred to this utterly non-violent way of life as mystical union with the Godhead. Now, this has always been the ultimate aim and heartfelt desire of mystics the world over, as much now as it was in the days of early Kabbalah. That's the end of the article. I hope that this talk helped you understand a bit more about how Kabbalists past and present look upon their own tradition, and how their soul fire led them to come to mystical union with life eternal. Now, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to respond to them in the comments below. And of course, all questions are valid. Thank you for your time and listening, and I hope to see you again.